Erin Smithers. I'm the director of the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project, and we are joined today by Robyn Holt, the director of the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. Today, we will be talking about the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. A little bit about Robyn. Robyn Holt serves as the director of the ARC of New Jersey's Criminal Justice Advocacy Program, with a background dedicated to supporting individuals with severe mental illness and co-occurring diagnoses. Robyn has worked in crisis intervention, partial care, community outreach, and directed New York City's largest supported housing program. Having closely interacted with individuals with disabilities in the community, she observed significant gaps in systemic issues in criminal justice matters, particularly the school-to-prison pipeline. Motivated to address these challenges, Robyn actively seeks opportunities to assist and advocate for individuals affected by these issues. In her current role, she facilitates crucial connections, contributes to publications, conducts statewide trainings, and collaborates with professionals and community leaders to identify and implement best practices for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Robyn holds a master's degree in counseling psychology, dual degrees in psychiatric rehabilitation psychology, and is currently pursuing a master's degree in social work at Rutgers. I also just want to go over a little bit of housekeeping. If you have any questions, you can post them in the Q&A box or in the chat box, and we will see them. If you're going to use the chat box, just make sure you change the options to host and panelists or to Robyn. If you select everyone will be able to see your questions. So just keep that in mind in case you wanted to remain anonymous. If you have any sort of technical issues or if your sound is cutting out, just let Frankie and myself know. We'll be monitoring the chat and help with any sort of technical issues that arise. Without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Robyn. And again, Robyn, thank you so much for being here and for doing this webinar.
Yes, of course. Thank you guys for that introduction. I'm very, very excited to be here to discuss the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. This is sort of an area that's not discussed as much as it really should be, because it does happen more often than we think in terms of individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities sort of being pushed into the criminal justice sector. So thanks again for this opportunity. I may turn my camera off just probably after this next slide because I have a cold, so just in case I have to blow my nose. So without further ado. Okay, so I just wanted to start with a breakdown of the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program in terms of what that looks like sort of staffing wise. We do work within the entire state of New Jersey. So many times when we speak to different professionals and even sort of clients or their family members, there's sort of this perception, because we span the state in terms of outreach, going to court appearances, advocacy, that our program is large. But in reality, as you can see here, it's rather small. So just for conceptualization purposes, I feel like this is helpful. So I am, as Erin mentioned, I'm the director of the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. And then below me, we have 3 case managers who do, sort of on the boots or boots on the ground, whatever that saying is, work. And as I mentioned before, that could be attending court appearances, that could be attending various meetings, that the client might have with their attorney or with their support system. So they're doing, the case management, they're creating the linkages, the referrals. So they're really the workforce of this program. We have Lindsay Peely on that same line there. She is our administrative assistant. So she takes care of, as the name suggests, a lot of the administrative end of things. So she takes all of the calls from clients or from family members, or if someone wants to make a referral, she's the one, as well as myself, who really work the referrals to ensure that they meet the criteria. And if they don't, providing them the necessary resources for what they do need and what they could utilize in the community. Lindsay has really been instrumental, not just for the criminal justice advocacy program, but for really all of the programs. She assists greatly with a lot of design and computer work, so she's really amazing as well. Underneath that line down, you will see Jennifer Harrison. So I did want to include her in our little organizational chart. She is the coordinator of one of our grant programs, which is called the Sexual Violence Prevention Project. She is under our sort of purview here because this program through the grants was applied for through the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. Geez, I don't have enough time to really convey what Jennifer has done during her time here, but she has worked a lot with Erin and her program, with the criminal justice side of things, really with a lot of the programs here. She's developed several curriculums, a 10-lesson sort of home curriculum. She's doing a lot of video work. Geez, the list just goes on. She even does legislation work with the director in that capacity to advocate on that side of things for sexual violence. So again, really, really strong staff here, and I'm, appreciative we have such a great team. Okay, so just a little bit more. I'm going to shut my video. Just a little bit more about my role under the Criminal Justice Advocacy Program. So there's a lot of things that go on within this program, but my primary sort of overarching goal is to ensure that individuals with IDD are treated fairly and justly as they move throughout the criminal justice system. So we do a lot of different tasks. We're involved in a lot, but sort of the epitome of what we do remains the same. And like I said, we want to make sure that the people that we work with are receiving the most fair treatment as they possibly can. And sometimes we need to advocate for just that. So I have listed here some of the key sort of responsibilities and duties that come along with this role. As you can see here on the left side, advocate for policies and policy development. So with that, not just myself, but myself and my team advocate for various policies and practices that essentially protect the rights and the interests of people that we work with. So specifically individuals with IDD in the criminal justice system. So we do have a program, Governmental Affairs, that does sort of the heavy lifting of that, but we do work with parties. We work with government agencies, we work with different organizations to really sort of shine the light on what our clients' needs are, so that the development and then therefore the implementation of the policies that would affect them and improve their life overall are at least in sort of the purview of who it needs to be in front of. So you'll see let's go over here by education and training programs. So a big part of what we do is designing, and again, that implementation of training programs for individuals who come into contact with this population in that type of degree in the criminal justice system. So law enforcement, attorneys, judges, sometimes court personnel themselves, because a lot of times they're the ones sort of seeing the clients when they first come into the court. They're the ones getting those phone calls. So we provide trainings to that sector, as well as many other sectors, which I'll go into more in depth at a later point. Community outreach. So we don't provide direct services in the quote unquote the way that normally you hear direct services. Like we don't do outreach to individuals' homes or that type of intensive type of work in that way. What I mean by community outreach is attending court appearances with our clients, going into the communities and advocating in different sort of capacities, like going into police stations, going into court houses, really getting the information out about our clients and their needs, and seeing if we could, if there's a need for a client, like let's say we visit a police station and we're talking to them about our program. The hope is that they may say, oh, we're working with someone currently on this case. It kind of seems like this person might have what you're describing. Is there any way that you could help? So we mean community outreach and sort of that in that manner. So in terms of the direct support and services, that includes things like case management. So like I said, our case managers do the case management. So they're ensuring that they receive the appropriate support and advocacy as soon as we get them onto our caseload until the very end. Now, I should state that we do get clients at any sort of sector of the criminal justice system. So that could be directly after arrest. That could be if the person's already incarcerated. That could be if the person is getting ready to go back into the community. We could get involved at that point to assist with probationary reasons. So really, we'll take the case at any sector that we get the person at, so we could try to help. Collaboration and partnership, this is a huge piece as well. As we know, you get more done when you work with others, and especially like-minded individuals. So we strongly believe in that when we're doing our work on a daily basis. Like, who could we reach out to? Who could be of assistance for this particular problem? And we try to think outside the box, instead of reaching out to the most obvious person who we haven't had success with in the past. We really do come together as a team and say, what else is out there? What can we do? Who can we contact that we have built some type of partnership or a collaboration with, who could maybe, help us out in what we need? Even if it's not themselves, maybe that person has a resource of some kind. So we work very closely with partners in the community to make sure that our clients' needs are met, whatever they may be. Research and evaluation, I think at face value, of course, as a program, we aggregate and accumulate and sort of analyze data. However, I think in more recent times, we've taken more of an interest than ever before in the evaluation of the data that we have on file. One, because we've been called upon to provide insights in terms of data for several reasons, but also for our own benefits in terms of creating presentations, creating training material. So I would say maybe once monthly, we really get together and say, what are the stats showing us? Have we seen an influx in referrals that contain a person with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, or are we seeing more assaults happening? And we really try to take it a step further and say, what's going on? Like, can we learn more about the situation to try to change it? Not just for that person, but if we're noticing a theme, how can we sort of intervene, if at all, and make a change to sort of break that up a bit? Okay, so I know this is a lot of sort of words, but this sort of captures what we do as a program in terms of the 4 key components. So what I do want to convey as well is that the criminal justice system is the only program of its kind that does exactly what we do. That's not to say that there's no programs otherwise in the community that work with people involved in the justice system who have a diagnosis of IDD. That very well may be the case. So what I mean by that is we're the only program that works specifically with individuals who have IDD who are considered defendants in criminal cases. So there may be programs in the community that assist with let's say, victims of crimes who have a diagnosis of IDD, or even witnesses of crimes who have a diagnosis. We're sort of completely on the other side of the spectrum, where we're really working and focused on the people who are being accused of committing certain offenses. So that sort of is what I mean by we're the only program that does exactly what we do. So I list them here, the key points, but I will get more into details as the presentation progresses. But overall, provides alternatives to incarceration. What we do know about this population is that they don't tend to fare well when they are incarcerated in traditional jails and or prisons, not just in the state of New Jersey, but this is a known factor actually, in the entire country, which is why providing alternatives is essential for this population. What I mean by that is, which I'll get into more in depth, is let's say an individual is due to perhaps have jail or prison as their ultimate outcome of their charge. We intervene with something called a personalized justice plan. And what we say is to the client, to their supports, as well as obviously to the courts, that let's say Johnny committed this crime, okay? But at the time of committing that crime, what were the issues at hand that that individual was dealing with? Johnny may not have had concrete housing. Johnny may have been unemployed and just had a lot of time to just, do whatever he wanted, leading him into a bit of trouble. Johnny may have not been receiving counseling or mental health services. So we look at everything that was happening during the time of the offense taking place, and we sit with the client and we sit with his or her supports, and we say, let's come up with a plan to provide to the judge and to the court personnel that will basically highlight what you're willing to do in terms of changes that you're willing to make with our support, with other support, including, let's say, the Division of Developmental Disabilities, so on and so forth. Because what we're trying to say to the judge is, I know that your ultimate goal is to send this individual to jail, but we want Johnny to stay in the community because it's safer for him and it's more rehabilitative in nature. So with that said, this is what we suggest, and this is what the client has agreed to do. We have had pretty good success rates with this document, but I will go into that at a later point. But that's just an example and the reasoning as to why we provide alternatives. I should say that we accept individuals who are 21 and older into this program who have a diagnosis of an intellectual and developmental disability. The reason why it is 21 and older, at least as of this moment, is because we are fully funded by the Division of Developmental Disabilities. And I know that there's, some changes taking place in some other respects, but as of this very moment, they still sort of view an adult in that capacity as 21 or older. So we're sort of pigeonholed in that way to the 21 and up. That's not to say I do not assist other people who come my way, but in terms of actual acceptance, we're looking at that criteria. Support and advocacy, as mentioned before, we provide support and advocacy in many different ventures, in many different ways for that individual, whatever it looks like. Every single client is different and has different needs. Sometimes that could be advocating for an accommodation if we know that that person has a hard time, let's say, has some hearing issues or has a hard time processing information. If we know this information ahead of time, this is what we would use to advocate in relation to the court ahead of that person going to court and try to see if we could get something done to make it more fair for that individual. administer trainings, various trainings throughout the state. We are trying to perpetually sort of keep sort of reinventing ourselves and thinking, what else could we do? What other sector can we hit up and try to get our information out there? Because we just feel so strongly that there's so many opportunities in that individual's life before they reach, let's say, jail or prison or referral to our program, that we want to try to get to various places that that person may have been involved with and were sort of missed or skipped. And a good example of that is trying to get ahead in terms of us providing trainings for, let's say, schools, right? Every person who's in jail right now has a past. They have a history. So we really try to look at sort of the line that that person took from, you know, as much as we have in terms of the record up until the point. And that's what we get our ideas from. We say, oh my gosh, you know, this person was involved in a church. This one was involved, they went to college for a short amount of time. So we use that to sort of fuel our training efforts. Resources and information. We do try to consider ourselves a quote unquote clearinghouse of information for people with IDD in the criminal justice system. And on the left side, you will see that this is our contact information, our phone number, our email address, and our website. Our website does have a lot of material on it. We do have a monthly webinar series that we host that's funded by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation called Equal Justice Talks. And I mean, I know I'm sort of biased, but I think we tend to get really, really influential and interesting presenters who speak on topics that directly affect this population. So you'll see those archived webinars on our website. And if you would like to know more, certainly email us and I could get you on the list, the training list that we send out for the announcements. So program overview. When we think about the very complex landscape of what is called the criminal justice system, as mentioned before, what we do know is that individuals with IDD face very unique barriers and challenges that many people who do not have an intellectual and developmental disability do not witness or they do not experience. So with an estimated 25,000 people who have IDD incarcerated nationwide, which I happen to think is a significant underestimate, their needs often go unrecognized, leading to what we see now, right? We're seeing a huge disproportionate representation of people with IDD behind bars. So CJAP, our program, I'll refer to it as CJAP, we try to step in and address this sort of critical issue. We try to serve as a link between the criminal justice system as well as the human service systems. So an example of that would be us sort of being in the middle of, let's say, Essex County Jail, but this person also has needs that need to get figured out with the Division of Developmental Disabilities. We tend to be that middle mediary person who communicates back and forth, because sometimes without that middleman, you know, the person at jail doesn't know who to call. The DDD people, they're, you know, they're a little like, oh, you know, who should we reach out to at the jail? We want to get this figured out, but we're not sure who to reach. So we try to step in and act as sort of that middleman for various parties who are involved. So the ongoing challenge that we sort of see sort of lies between or lies within establishing and maintaining linkages between these systems. It could be very difficult, especially when we're talking about, let's say, dual diagnosis, when a person has a severe and persistent mental illness, as well as an intellectual and developmental disability. it can be a bit difficult, you know, especially at the earlier stages. Let's say that person isn't um, receiving fully DDD services yet because they're sort of in between of the DMHAS landscape and the DDD landscape. It could be very, very confusing. So I would say those are one of the primary challenges that we have, is to make it as seamless as possible in terms of providing support for our clients and for people who have IDD, who are sort of stuck in the middle of various systems. So I know this page looks a bit odd in terms of, you know, the wording that you may see. So you see micro, meso, and macro. Uh, these are terms that are used in the field of social work, and sociology, actually. But I thought that this breakdown was probably the easiest in terms of understanding when I break up the types of things that we do. I think what is probably the most unique about our program is the fact that we have the ability to infiltrate and create change in various sectors. Okay, many times with traditional programs, like I'll use, I don't know, this is really mental health oriented, but many times, like let's say a program of assertive community treatment for, let's say, people with mental illness, that is a model, right? And within that model, the individuals who work there are supposed to engage in very specific acts. We do this, we write our notes, and we go home. Many programs operate in that way, and I'm not saying it's negative or positive, but what I am saying is that we have the option and the flexibility to access a lot of different sectors at one time. So we're not only meeting with the client face to face and doing that very sort of quote unquote micro work, we're not only working collaboratively with organizations in terms of making referrals and sort of in that way, and also we're not only working on the macro level, we're not only working with large scale agencies and departments, for instance, the Department of Corrections, like we're not all the way there either. So what I mean by that is that in any day, we could really be completing micro, meso, and macro acts. Example, today, let's say, I go to court with my client, we go to Middlesex County Court. That's micro because I'm working one-on-one with that individual. Right? At that time, I might be talking to that client, I might be talking to his attorney, trying to create linkages, figuring out what the next step would be if that person needs accommodations. That is what I mean by that first top sector here. In that very same day, I might go back to the office, right? And I might, you know, go to my computer and say, oh, shoot, you know, I have to respond to this grant that we've been approved for, you know, and we have to start communicating about the grant material, going back and forth with the stakeholders, you know, how the training is going to look like, start, you know, creating the training in and of itself, the PowerPoint. And then I might get a call from the ombudsman, like, oh, okay, you know, we have this client who has an issue, and I might be communicating still at that meso level with the ombudsman of individuals with IDD and their families. In that same day, which has happened in the past, I might have a training or a meeting with the commissioner or the director of Department of Correction. So that would be an example of the macro, right? Because that's all the way up there. That's a big, this is a big sector. That's the big picture, okay? So that is sort of encompassing what I mean that we really go back and forth in this sector, all in a day's work, which makes our program really, really special because we could touch more people when we have that flexibility and that option to do so. So just to provide a more comprehensive idea about some of the things that we see on a daily basis, these are some program statistics of the clients who are on our caseload. So I have it broken down to the type of diagnosis, the prevalence of dual diagnosis. So again, an IDD as well as a mental illness. And then on the next page, I have a bit more information that we'll get to when we get there. So first and foremost, under the intellectual and developmental disabilities chart, you will see that intellectual disability is the most prevalent diagnosis among the individuals that we serve. You will also see on the other side, on the circle chart, pie graph, autism and dual diagnosis are also very common for the clientele that we work with as well. You'll also see some other insights, mental health disorders. You may see ADHD, the mood disorders, PTSD. They're present in sort of varying degrees, and less common, but still very significant. You'll see diagnoses such as fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, so FASD, general convulsive epilepsy, and cases of TBI. So that really does indicate the very diverse range of needs that we see on a daily basis within our program. And like I said before, these are some of the statistics that we keep track of that really does help us guide, where our efforts should be directed into, especially with like dual diagnosis purposes. Here are some more program statistics. This one is broken down into the counties that we serve, as well as the type of housing placement. So you'll see that in terms of the counties, Burlington County, at least as of now, by a lot, has the highest number of individuals served. And you'll see after that, Middlesex County follows pretty closely. But nonetheless, there's varying degrees of the various counties within the state that we serve. And sometimes when I see something like Hunterdon being pretty low in what our referrals are, or the clients that we have, that's also something that we use to think, like, is it because Hunterdon County is smaller? Is there less awareness of our program in that county? What can we do? Is there someone we could reach out to in Hunterdon County? Should we reach out to the municipal court there to tell them a bit more about our information to get that awareness? So again, these are really, really fantastic tools that we use to guide us. Now here, you'll see a breakdown of the legal charges that our clients accrue in terms of prevalency. So by far, assault is definitely the most common charge among the individuals that we serve here. Many times the assault is from one client to another peer in some capacity, whether that's at a group home, whether that's in a day program. We see that very often. But another type of charge in terms of assault that we see is many times a client and a staff member. So again, a client versus a staff member at a group home, day program, mental health program, whatever that may be. Those are by far what we see most often. However, you'll see charges related to violent crimes as well. We have a few on our caseload that are charged with attempted murder, sexual assault. We have several sexual assault charges. We have things like carjacking. We also have nonviolent offenses like burglary, theft. We have drug charges. We have trespassing. So again, we're really running the gamut when we look at the varying legal charges that affect this population. So I keep talking about the clients that we serve. So in the grand scheme of diagnoses of intellectual and developmental disabilities, these that are listed here are some of the more common. Now, I didn't add intellectual disabilities to that, but I wanted to focus more on some of the other ones. So autism spectrum disorder, of course, Down syndrome. It's we don't see charges as much with Down syndrome, but I added this because of the representation that this diagnosis has in the community. So many times we'll get calls about a person with Down syndrome, but they haven't reached the level of like crisis or sort of criminal justice involvement yet, because people with Down syndrome may often have more supervision and supports than, let's say, someone who has a TBI would. So they sort of have an intervening factor that many of the other diagnoses don't necessarily have as much of. So traumatic brain injury, that's a big one, and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Oh, geez, I don't want to get into this, but I do feel it would be remiss not to mention this, that many times when we're thinking about IDD in the community, especially in the criminal justice system, some of the key, we hear about autism and we hear about intellectual disability. People with FASD are extremely overrepresented in the criminal justice system. The problem is the lack of identification for this specific population. The reason for that is very systemic. And for time purposes, I can't go into that, but I do just want to make note of the fact that when we think about the criminal justice system and the people who are in it, we really have to be mindful of the fact that there's many, 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 many cases of FASD that are not reported, misdiagnosed, and are just under the radar because of several reasons. I mean, even the name in and of itself is stigmatizing, which makes people not want to ask. But I felt it necessary to mention that. Just makes it feel better. So what is the scope of the problem? I know I mentioned this a few times, that individuals with IDD don't tend to do very well in jail or prison in sort of the general sense, right? So what is the problem when it comes to people with IDD in the criminal justice system? So this population faced many challenges. Like I said before with FASD, many of them are systemic issues. Many of them are due to biases, but a lot of them are due to lack of appropriate accommodations and understanding and identification. So I did sort of go into detail in terms of these 6 right here. What time are we at? Oh my goodness. I'll make this very short because I tend to talk a lot. I'm so sorry. But so fear, prejudice, and lack of understanding. So individuals with IDD often face significant fear and anxiety when involved in the criminal justice system due to just not being aware of what's going on. The terms that are used, the people who are surrounding you, there's people of authority. This could be extremely intimidating for that individual. Prejudice and stereotypes about this population, this can oftentimes influence the behavior and the decisions of people who are involved in the case for that person. But that could start all the way at the beginning in terms of law enforcement, and then could work its way through to attorneys, to judges, and to even juries if it gets to that point. So there's often a lack of training among criminal justice professionals on how they should interact with people with IDD, again, leading to misunderstandings, but more detrimentally to inappropriate responses. So this person is in court and they start, rocking back and forth, and they start to escalate a bit. Many times the people in the court do not know, oh, okay, this person is just having a hard time. They have a diagnosis of autism. This is how we should interact with that person. that understanding is very rarely there with these individuals. I'm not saying it never happens, but I'm saying there's an overall lack of understanding, leading to, worsened outcomes for that person. So unrecognized diagnoses, this is huge, 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 huge. Many individuals with IDD may not necessarily have a formal diagnosis or may not have their diagnosis recognized by the professionals that they're coming into contact with. Again, this could lead to inappropriate handling and a lack of necessary accommodations during legal processes. So if a person, let's say, if the attorney doesn't know that their client has a diagnosis of, let's say, FASD, without that first understanding there, that first sort of domino block, if that's not there, everything else falls, right? Like if I don't know that this person needs an accommodation because I don't know they have a diagnosis, therefore that person's not getting an accommodation because that knowledge is not there. Victimized at high rates. So people with IDD are at a significantly higher risk of becoming a victim of a crime, and that goes for any type of crime: physical, sexual, psychological, emotional abuse when they're incarcerated. Their vulnerabilities, such as sometimes a difficulty in communicating with others or not understanding social cues, can make them oftentimes very easy targets for their peers in jail. Let me keep it at that. But, some other issues are, for example, waiving their Miranda rights unintentionally. So, a person with IDD may waive their Miranda rights unintentionally. They might even provide false confessions, or they might just be unable to assist in their defense due to their disabilities. So again, going back to the legal professionals, many times they lack the training to understand and to recognize these issues as they're happening, which obviously will lead to an unfair trial or sometimes even a wrongful conviction. Okay, so program components, I know a lot of these start to blend together, but these are sort of our principles that we believe in terms of, uh, you know, like how we try to gear our work on a day-to-day basis. So we keep in mind intervention, we keep in mind advocacy, case management, education, training, and again, that personalized justice plan. So again, these are just the principles that our program abides by. So intervention, just a quick snippet about this, because I sort of mentioned this before, but intervention is a crucial role for our staff in terms of our work with our clients. So we assist them with navigating the complexities of the legal system. We do try to take a very comprehensive approach, and we sort of address the barriers as they move throughout the various aspects of their journey. And we sort of, deal with one hurdle at a time. We also offer technical guidance and technical assistance to our clients. In the more obvious sense, many times our clients do not have access to, let's say, a computer. They don't know how to work a Zoom court session. They don't know how to work a computer in general. We'll offer assistance in that very obvious technical way as well for our clients, really whatever they need. So sort of the breakdown of this presentation, I'm going to mention some of the examples of the components of our program and then give sort of very concrete examples of what I mean by that. Okay, so here you have aware. So this is something that Jennifer Harrison, who's the coordinator of the Sexual Violence Prevention Project, and my team created for the benefit of attorneys who work with our clients. So this aware is comprising of sort of a pocket-sized handbook, and we sort of manifested it outwardly from that to include also like magnets and certain things that are handy for these professionals for quick and easy reference. So let's say that person, the attorney is working with someone who has a disability, they'll pull out that little handbook and say, okay, I know this person has autism. Let me read up on this section. What are some of the communication issues that may come along with this? And how do I address them? What are the advice, the tips that are given in this handbook to help us better navigate and work with our client? An example of the advocacy piece. So when I said that we try to infiltrate every sort of sector possible, this is an example of something that came about, I guess this was last year. But the ombudsman and our program realized that there was nothing in the New Jersey Division of Developmental Disabilities supports program policies and procedures manual for support coordinators. There was nothing in there that triggered a response. So if one of their clients got in legal issues, right, there was nothing in their actual manual that stated the next steps for them, right? So we identified this issue and we said, look, for the benefit of the client, for the benefit of their families, we need to make this a protocol and we need to amend this manual to include this so that there's a system in place for support coordinators and for their clients when this does occur. So that is one example of the advocacy. Case management and education. So the case management piece, in the traditional sense, taking care of clients, the calls, the emails, going back and forth, creating linkages, like I said before, being that middleman for the various systems in play. Education, of course, raising awareness, providing education to really any individuals that we come across, whether it's people within universities, people in school, people in the courts. So an example sort of this is recognizing sort of gaps in the system, right? So in my communication with one of the grant holders for a different grant, we were talking one day and I was talking about this very issue that the school to prison pipeline, involves youth who are pushed into the legal justice system in varying degrees, but oftentimes affecting people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at a much greater rate. So again, providing this education that, this is a problem. The school to prison pipeline is an issue that affects this population. Over and over again, she reached out to me and said, look, I want to create a course, because I was thinking about what you said. We need to raise awareness for people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, for juveniles, so that we could try to prevent the school to prison pipeline as as a whole, that whole phenomenon. So this class actually starts not next week, in 2 weeks, that I'll be facilitating for Rutgers based on this very purpose. And that's, again, because of the education piece and raising that awareness. So this is also something that we've been trying to do more of as a program. Again, trying to get ahead of the game, right? Sometimes we tend to, as a nation, really, in terms of our care, we tend to be very reactive, right? So the person's already in the criminal justice system. The person has already been met with a crisis, and then we get triggered to come on and assist. But why are we waiting? We have to try to get ahead of the game. We have to try to get to these places that these individuals will come across, whether it's professionals in universities. So these are all students, either in social work, in criminal justice, in psychology, who may come into contact with a person with IDD to assist them prior to sort of a crisis role. So if you get this information out there ahead of time while they're still students, they'll be equipped with that knowledge when they go into the field and start working. So we've done a lot of collaboration, Princeton, St. Elizabeth University, Stockton University, I know I'm forgetting a few, Rowan University, but so on and so forth. And it's been really, really successful thus far. So then there's the training and the personalized justice piece. I will show an example of the personalized justice plan on either the next page or the one after that. But the PJP, in its essence, serves, like I said before, as an alternative to incarceration. It can be also a condition that is drafted when someone is coming out into the community to try to help them sort of remain on track with their probation. And it's also an accountability tool for the client. You know, if the client goes into general population jail or prison, how are they, like, besides being confined to a place, right? How are they being held accountable and being given rehabilitative opportunities? They're not, right? All they know is that now I'm in this place where I am confined. What am I doing here? And is this supposed to help me? Like, we know that there's better options for an individual with IDD who commits a crime. And typically it's out in the community, but if not, then it may be in a different setting, right? Like, they're not ideal, but sometimes we even come down to the point where we're contemplating advocating for psychiatric hospitalization on a longer term basis or general population in jail or prison. Again, both are not ideal in essence, but sometimes we do advocate for the psychiatric admission as opposed to the other, because at least that venue has individuals who specialize in mental health needs and theoretically should be more rehabilitative than jail or prison would be. So this is just an example of the crisis intervention trainings that we do. We don't do every single county, but we do most, I would say, at this point. Let me show this. But these trainings are geared specifically toward law enforcement. It has sort of expanded from that point, and I'll explain more about that on a later slide. But the original concept for CIT is to educate law enforcement, but also some community professionals who still can attend, on how to work and respond to a person in crisis. So that's not limited to people with IDD. That could include individuals with mental illness. That can include people with addiction. That could include people with neurological issues. It could really run the gamut in that way. So this is an example of the expanded version that we're working on right now, which is a federal grant in collaboration with Rutgers UBHC and the Department of Corrections. I won't spend too much time, but we are involved, and it's the first nationally adapted model that we're partaking in at this current time, and the next one is in August, to again take what exists with CIT and expand, and the CRIT is really directed for correctional officers. So you have the law enforcement, which is the community side with the CIT, and now you have the CRIT, crisis response and intervention training, which is directed more toward correctional. So we're trying to, you know, access every realm that we possibly can. This is an example of a personalized justice plan. I know it's not ideal in terms of its wording and configuring as you see it, but just to give you an idea of something or of what it would look like for a personalized justice plan. I know it's hard to read, but this is an example. So as you can see here, we go through each domain in that person's life, whether that's vocational, whether that's counseling, advocacy, education, housing, really whatever affects that person. And we try to work with that person with their supports and again, pitch this almost to the judge as a reason why that person should not go to general jail or prison and why they should maybe be in the community or in a more appropriate setting. So last but not least, I believe it's one of the last slides, but these are just some future goals and projects that we're working on as a program. So the school to prison pipeline, I mean, that is extremely important to us because of what I explained before. You know, every ending has a beginning. How can we get ahead and try to prevent it from getting to the point for these individuals that it has gotten to? Where can we provide change, or how can we assist in providing change? As mentioned before, our program only accepts individuals who are 21 and older because we're fully funded by the Division of Developmental Disabilities. However, we feel very strongly about the need for this type of program, but for juveniles. Believe it or not, I get more referrals for juveniles that we can't accept than for adults who meet the criteria. Of course, that speaks to the need for that type of program. So we've been sort of working with DCP and DCF a bit in trying to see if there's any grant opportunities in that direction. We did begin the pilot program for CRIT, which I explained a bit more, and we have our second installment in August. And you know, teaching the Rutgers course, of course, which will hopefully raise awareness about disabilities as it relates to juveniles. And last but not least, dual diagnosis, FASD, structural racism, and prison reform, especially restorative justice. That's one of our key goals as well. So just to give sort of insight into the directions that our program is going to be trying to go into. And I think timing wise, we're ending on a great note here. This is our contact information again. We do have a Facebook. It's had a bit of a slow start, but it does have several short educational videos for people who may find this beneficial. Let's say, just for example, how to dress appropriately for court. So we actually have us as actors giving different examples of what would be considered appropriate, what would be inappropriate, and we do it we have a male and a female perspective. So things like that we have on our Facebook that could be helpful to anyone who's going through court or just the legal system in general. So I think that is it. Yes.
Excellent. Are there any questions for Robyn about the presentation or the slides or Robyn's program, CJAP? Feel free to place them in the chat box or in the Q&A box. If for some reason you think of a question right after this webinar happens, that always happens to me, you
Mhm.
can reach out to Robyn, or you can reach out to our program, the New Jersey Self-Advocacy Project, and we can get those questions to Robyn as well. I'm not seeing any questions though. Robyn, that was fantastic. Your program does so much, so I know it's hard to contract it all into an hour presentation, but thank you so much for doing this, and keep doing the fantastic work that CJOP does. And again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody for attending, and I hope you have a fantastic holiday weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.